Welcome back to another Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really specific, historically anchored viewpoint from a spring 2001 article published by Crescent International. Now, just to be clear right out of the gate, our goal here isn't to take a side, endorse a viewpoint, or tell you what to think. No. Instead, we're just going to impartially dive into this fascinating primary source to understand exactly how the author constructed their argument, visually breaking down these complex and honestly sometimes controversial ideas. Let's get right into it.
So, hooking right into the heart of the matter, we've got to start with the central mystery of our explainer today. The author of this piece looks at the relationship between the United States and Israel and asks one massive question. Why does America support Israel so fiercely through thick and thin? I mean, people all across the globe have tried to answer this, right? And the author notes that onlookers often strain to see this relationship change. But the source argues that to truly understand this dynamic, we have to look way past the surface-level assumptions.
But hey, before we dissect the author's answer, we really need to set the stage and establish the era. This article was published back in April 2001. George W. Bush had literally just entered the White House, and the Middle East was right in the throes of the Second Intifada. Grasping this timeline is absolutely crucial because it completely frames the author's geopolitical mindset and the super intense political climate of the day.
All right, Section 1, an unconditional bond. Let's move beyond party politics.
Just look at the shifting political winds in Washington. During the Clinton era, the author points out that Democrats essentially acted like a branch of the Israeli government. They note the high number of Jewish cabinet members and, of course, Al Gore's selection of Joe Lieberman as his running mate. But then, look at the other side of the aisle. The Bush era kicks off, and despite Republican challenges to Israel in the past, the author notes that officials like Colin Powell quickly cozied up to Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, right alongside vows from Bush to actually move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. The big takeaway here? Well, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican calling the shots, the author argues the underlying pro-Israel foreign policy remains exactly the same.
Moving right along to Section 2, beyond politics, and honestly, beyond money too.
So the source systematically takes aim at the conventional explanations favored by American leftists like Noam Chomsky, as well as those popular in Arab media. For instance, the author acknowledges the Zionist lobby, but argues, hey, it isn't omnipotent. It doesn't have the magical power to just dictate everything. Okay, what about corporate globalization? Well, the author rebuts that global corporations don't strictly require this level of unyielding loyalty to function. And arms sales. Honestly, it's a bit of a bitter irony. Arab nations buy these massive arsenals from the West, but they haven't actually used them against Israel in any meaningful way since the 1970s. So the military-industrial complex alone, it just doesn't explain this deep love for Israel.
Cold War concerns, the Zionist lobby, corporate globalization, arms sales, the author firmly believes all of these are really just symptoms, or maybe side benefits. They aren't the root cause. By knocking down these purely material theories one by one, the author clears the stage for what they consider a hidden, undeniable truth.
Which brings us to Section 3, the ideological roots, specifically manifest destiny and millenarianism.
Okay, so the crucial point is captured perfectly in this bold quote straight from the text. America is an older and larger Israel, perhaps even a parent, and like any parent, it loves its child. Wow. The author sees these two nations as sharing a fundamental familial identity. It's a deeply provocative claim, right? If Israel fails, the author argues, it would mean admitting the failure of the deepest passions of America and the West itself. Let's actually look at the two specific ideologies the author uses to explain this tight parent-child bond.
The first ideology is manifest destiny. But actually, in the context of this article, it's described as a concept where a chosen people feel entirely justified in ruling over all others. The author traces this all the way back to early American Puritans, who saw themselves as a chosen people, using this exact belief to justify the conquering of the American continent. According to the article, this deeply ingrained belief in a providential right to rule is fundamentally shared with the foundational ideas of Israel. Then there's the second, and perhaps even more intense ideology, millenarianism. The author defines this as a really specific, narrow vision of Christianity unique to America that pins its ultimate hopes on Jerusalem. It's basically the theological belief that bringing about the true millennium, the literal reign of Christ on earth for 1,000 years, requires control over Jerusalem. In this framework, America's fervent missionary zeal looks directly to Jerusalem as its true spiritual center and homeland.
Now you might be wondering, what about secular America? Well, the author accounts for that too. In the secular version of this ideology, America itself effectively replaces Christ.
So instead of a religious millennium, it becomes this imperial demand for global rule, with America leading the charge and Israel acting as its primary proxy and saving grace in the Middle East. Both the religious and secular tracks, according to the source, ultimately lead to the exact same unyielding support.
Let's pivot to Section 4, Threats to the Alliance. A conditional future. Writing back in 2001, remember, the author outlines a very specific chain of events that could actually force a wedge between the two nations. Step 1 requires an ongoing intifada, coupled with widespread global boycotts and civil disobedience targeted directly at the U.S. Then Step 2 requires severe domestic economic and political downturns within the United States itself. Only when these two massive pressures combine, global unrest and domestic hardship, do we finally hit Step 3. That's when American powers, driven purely by their own self-interest, finally begin to view Israel as a liability rather than an asset.
And this leads to a wildly bold prediction. The author argues that if that chain of events occurs and American backing suddenly vanishes, modern Israel would be gone within a decade. Literally 10 years. It's a staggering claim that really highlights just how entirely dependent the author believes Israel is on its American parent.
Finally, Section 5, The Enduring Legacy, Stubborn Ideologies.
The final thesis basically comes down to a battle of vulnerabilities versus anchors. On one side, you have the short-term vulnerabilities. Political systems can crumble, economies can absolutely go into shambles, and physical states can be dismantled. But then, on the exact opposite side is the long-term anchor. The author argues that the shared beliefs in millenarianism, manifest destiny, and a feeling of world superiority are far, far more stubborn than any emerging economic reality. According to the source, they're fused directly into the American identity.
Which leaves us with a final, memorable question directly from the source's conclusion. Do deep-seated ideologies truly outlast political and economic shifts? The author of this 2001 Congressional International article firmly believed they do, arguing that the ideas binding America and Israel will outlive the nations themselves. It's a completely provocative lens that places theology and ideology miles above simple politics or economics. So what do you think? Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you in